I am really excited to get started with today's webinar, Student Success, AI, and Academic Integrity. The field of AI and the tools that students have access to are evolving constantly. And today we're going to be taking a look at the current landscape within academia and see how these tools and academic integrity intersect, especially when it comes to plagiarism. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters today. I'm joined by our regular presenters, Sarah Snyder and Dr. Amy Dietzman, and I'll let them take it away.
Thank you so much, Maxine. We're excited to get started today. So as Maxine just said, we have a student success series. This is just the first one. Here are the dates for the other 3 that are coming up. And we will be sharing our social media accounts at the end of this, so you can kind of follow along and make sure that you're ready when that next one pops up, which is coming up on the 22nd of October. So you have a little time. Today, we're going to help you answer a few questions that are probably burning questions you've had before related to academic integrity. Why should I be concerned with academic integrity and plagiarism? And what does it really mean when we talk about academic integrity? What does that look like? Also, when it comes to plagiarism, what does plagiarism look like? How can I avoid it? And how do I trust my own ideas? How do I know that they're really mine and I'm not always plagiarizing? And then when it comes to artificial intelligence, we're going to talk about that place for AI in academics. So we're going to get to all of that. But first, we're going to start off with a couple of case studies to see if you can identify whether or not this is plagiarism. So last semester, Ravi took an ecology class and he wrote a great paper about biodiversity. This semester, he's taking a wildlife biology class and he realizes that his paper from last semester would work really well for one of his assignments for this semester too. Is it plagiarism for Ravi to turn in the same paper twice? Take a moment, think about that, and write down your answer if you have somewhere to write that down. And we're going to come back to this at the end. Let's look at one more, Melanie. Melanie has to write a paper on some of the causes and symptoms of drug abuse for a public health class. She Googles and she finds several public discussion boards that feature posted questions which are answered by doctors. She uses their answers and she cites internet as her source. She also finds a site that is established by the mother of a recovering addict, which contains information that she has compiled as a resource for other families. Since the author of the site does not indicate where she got her information from, Melanie uses that and cites internet again as her source. Well, what do you think? Has Melanie plagiarized the information that she found on the internet? Write your answer down to this one, and we'll come back to it. Before we get started explaining, what you should and shouldn't do and giving you some examples, we're going to start with some definitions first and make sure everybody's on the same page. So plagiarism is the act of taking someone else's work and passing it off as your own. It's important to note that plagiarism is sometimes intentional, but really most of the times it's inadvertent or accidental. And we are going to help you today understand how and why that happens and what you can do to avoid that. My guess is most of you aren't here to figure out how to plagiarize, you're figuring out how not to. So when you hear the words academic integrity, you probably hear it in connection to plagiarism. They kind of go hand in hand, but it is a little bit more than that. It's the commitment to and the demonstration of honest and moral behavior in an academic setting. So there are 6 fundamental values which encompass academic integrity. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. The first is honesty. In an academic environment, you can demonstrate honesty by being truthful, giving credit to the owner of the work that you're using, providing factual evidence, and aspiring to objectivity. That means you consider all sides and you know that you might have some of your own potential biases. The unethical scholar will say something like, I created this, it came from me, even though they know that it actually didn't. Let's move on to the next fundamental value of academic integrity, and that is trust. The ways that you can demonstrate trust in an academic environment are to clearly state expectations and follow through, Promote transparency in your values and your processes and your outcomes. Trust others and encourage mutual understanding. Some of these things can be put to the test when you work with a couple of your peers in your classes on group assignments. When you're working with others, you want them to be able to trust you and you want to be able to trust them. If you've ever worked in a group where you didn't trust the people that you were working with, you know how problematic that can be. The unethical scholar will say something like, if my instructor has a problem or wonders where my information came from, they can just ask me directly, instead of saying, my instructor can trust me that I included all of my sources in my work. And the third fundamental value is fairness. Ways to demonstrate fairness in an academic environment are to apply rules and policies consistently, engage with others equitably, keep an open mind, be objective, and take responsibility for your own actions. The unethical scholar may think that certain rules in an academic environment really don't apply to them. They might say, it's okay if I don't follow this rule exactly. I've tried hard the rest of the time. No one's going to notice if I bend the rules this time. And that leads to the fourth value, which is respect. Respectfulness is really important in the way we treat one another and the way we treat our instructors. Ways to demonstrate respect in an academic environment are to practice active listening, receive feedback willingly, accept that everyone's thoughts and ideas have some validity, show empathy, seek open communication, affirm others and accept their differences, and recognize the consequences of your words and your actions on others. Now, I can tell you as a college instructor myself, I've seen that unethical scholar who's not respectful many times in my own classes. When students aren't respectful of others, maybe in discussions or debates, or when students haven't been respectful to me in emails when they ask me questions or when they don't like feedback that I've provided to them. So I've seen comments like this before. It's ridiculous that I got a B on this paper. Did you even read it? So it's okay to disagree with other classmates or even with your instructor, but you want to be sure that you're respectful in doing so. The next one is responsibility. Ways to demonstrate responsibility in an academic environment are to hold yourself accountable for your actions, engage with others in difficult conversations, know and follow institutional rules and conduct codes, create, understand, and respect personal boundaries, follow through with tasks and expectations, and always model good behavior. The unethical scholar will say something like, my instructor won't take the time to check this information, so I'm not going to waste my time citing everything. And the sixth and last fundamental value is courage. And you might be thinking, courage doesn't seem like it has a place in an academic environment, but there are ways to demonstrate it. It includes being brave when others aren't, taking a stand to address a wrongdoing, and supporting others who are doing the same, enduring discomfort for your personal beliefs, defending integrity, and being willing to take risks and risk failure, which we all know that we do as students. We're always taking a risk and we're always risking failure. The unethical scholar would possibly participate in a group project where others are plagiarizing and they might go along with it, even though they know it's happening and say like, it's not my problem. So the six fundamental values are a critical part of academic integrity, and you can probably see how easily all of these actually tied into plagiarism. So now we're going to jump into plagiarism and talk a little bit about the 5 types. So 5 types of plagiarism are deliberate cheating, accidental, self-plagiarism, mosaic plagiarism, and then we're going to talk about AI. So let's start with deliberate cheating. This is the most obvious. It's when you copy someone else's assignment, or you find something on the internet, and turn it in as your own, or you buy a paper online or from another student, or when you look at someone else's paper while you're taking a test. There are probably 100 more ways you can cheat, but they are more than likely pretty obvious to you. So we all know about this kind, I would assume. But accidental plagiarism happens when we put others' words or work into our own paper and we don't realize that we have done that. This is so easy to do. You're reading something and it's really great, and you get distracted and you do another 10 things before you come back to that assignment again. And you remember that there was something that you read and it was good and you want to include it, but you're like, where was that? Did I read that, or did I hear it somewhere, or where was that? And the next thing you know, you've included it in your paper and you haven't cited it. Self-plagiarism doesn't seem all that bad because, after all, it's your work. Self-plagiarism is copying your work from one class to another or turning in the same paper twice. So you might be thinking, I came up with this the first time, so I own it. Not exactly true. It's actually self-plagiarism. Mosaic plagiarism is copying and pasting something that you found possibly on the internet, and you know you need to reword it and you need to make it your own. So you change up a word here or there. Maybe you reorder the sentence a little bit. Most students don't realize that using similar words or groups of words or the same structure is actually mosaic plagiarism. In order to correctly paraphrase, you have to use your own words and your own sentence structure. So this one's a little bit trickier. So I'm going to give you an example so you can really see it. Here's something a student wrote. I clutched my pillowcase and stood at the iron door in my coat and hat. It was morning and the plate had not been removed. I was ready in no time. Here's the original sample of the work that the student was writing about. If you look at the colors, you'll see where certain phrases match up. Stood at the iron door is in both places, and you can see it in dark red. Plate had not been removed is in both places, and it's turquoise. So if you look at that, you might think, oh, that student did pretty well. They changed up the sentence structure. But the point here is that there's very little new information. There are very few words that actually came from the student. So what happened was the student got a little stuck in what the original author said, and they couldn't think of a new way to rewrite it. So in just a few minutes, I'm going to tell you how to avoid this mistake. But before we do that, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah so she can tell you a little bit more about AI.
Thanks, Amy. As researchers, whether students or professionals, we must have integrity in the work we complete and ascribe to our name. In our critical thinking and research skills webinar that we did last fall, and you can find that on our YouTube channel, we talked about some helpful ways to use ChatGPT. A couple of examples were using it to help you find specific types of sources that might be more relevant to your research topic, and using it to gather ideas about where to look for the information that you need. What we're going to focus on today is having integrity as researchers and what usage of ChatGPT will or will not land you in academic hot water. So we're going to see how we can use ChatGPT as an aid rather than as a crutch or as a cheating mechanism. But first, what is the purpose of research anyway? Well, the purpose of research is to gather sources that help you explore a topic and then combine them with your own thoughts or understanding to produce a cohesive representation of your knowledge, and then also to advance human knowledge in general. Without research, we have no growth of knowledge as an individual or as a society. If what is being represented in your research findings is actually AI's understanding of the topic, setting aside the fact that AI has no understanding of the content in the first place, you are plagiarizing a language predictor. While AI may not produce consistent results in such a way that what is produced this time is necessarily reproducible word for word, you are still using someone or something else's logical constructs to produce something that you're passing off as your own. And that is plagiarism. To have integrity as a student or as a researcher, what you pass off as your own must truly be your own. Why can't we use what ChatGPT feeds us? Well, as we discussed last fall, ChatGPT has some limitations. We listed out quite a few, so be sure to go back and watch that webinar for some more detailed information. We're going to focus on 4 of those limitations here. Those limitations are ChatGPT's knowledge cutoff, the potential for inaccuracies in its responses, the presence of biases in its learning model, and the lack of ability to comprehend or apply critical thinking. Let's start with the knowledge cutoff. ChatGPT in particular, as of the preparation of this webinar, has a knowledge cutoff of August 2023. Anything that has happened or been updated on the internet since then is not part of ChatGPT's knowledge base. With research, we want the most recent information available. So as time goes on, ChatGPT outdates itself. That's not going to be helpful to most research. Next, we have the potential for inaccuracies and inconsistencies in what ChatGPT produces. You and I could both type the exact same prompt or question and receive wildly different results, some of which may not even align factually with one another. Because it is only looking at language patterns and not actually doing research or even comprehending what it is spitting out to you, everything it produces needs to be vetted against known sources produced by critical thinkers, other researchers. When you think about that, you could end up spending more time vetting what ChatGPT produces than you would actually doing the legwork of the research yourself. Our third limitation is the presence of bias. Like with inaccuracy, everything ChatGPT produces needs to be vetted for bias. Again, why not read the sources and write the research yourself at this point? And last, remember that while ChatGPT has been programmed to sound like a human, in its writing style, it is not in fact human. So there is no critical thinking being applied to what it has written or what it has put together in word patterns for you. It's just following a formula, looking for the most reasonable next word based on its data set. This means also that nuance and syntax can be misinterpreted and lead to false or irrelevant responses. And as a non-human, it is not capable of comprehending what it is producing or knowing whether or not what it has produced is completely nonsensical. So it's possible for it to generate complete nonsense and not even know that it has done so. To avoid that, you have to vet it. We've been talking about ChatGPT having appropriate and inappropriate uses from the perspective of academic integrity. But you may be wondering, what exactly does that look like in reality? Well, let's meet a couple of students who used ChatGPT during their research process and identify whether their use was appropriate or inappropriate. We're going to go through 4 cases, then come back and decide whether each is an example of appropriate or inappropriate use of ChatGPT. So, case 1. Chris needs to write a research paper on the development of paper money as a medium for trade. The instructor has provided a grading rubric that requires the paper to use a minimum of 7 sources, at least one of which must be a reputable journal article, and at least 2 of which must be historical books that have been written on the topic. Chris feeds all of that into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT writes a paper. Chris reads that paper in full, cites ChatGPT in the resources list, and turns it in. So to summarize, ChatGPT wrote the paper, the student read it and agrees with it, and ChatGPT was cited as a source. So that's our first case. Case 2, Rory is researching the efficacy of reclamation projects in local public parks. The instructor's grading rubric requires the use of at least 4 sources, one of which must include research conducted by or for a nationally known public park. And Rory uses ChatGPT to identify some well-known public parks and published research about their reclamation efforts. Then Rory follows up on those suggestions from ChatGPT by discussing them with a librarian and finding the original sources where that research was published. Rory compiles the relevant research into a cohesive paper of original writing, does not cite ChatGPT in the resources list, and turns it in. So to summarize that case, ChatGPT helped the student ID some sources. The student did independent research with those sources, and ChatGPT was not cited. Case 3, Drew is researching the accuracy of ChatGPT in producing information about different species of animals. The grading rubric calls for a minimum of 5 sources, but no specifics on what types of sources they must be. Drew asks ChatGPT some questions about frogs and turtles and includes ChatGPT's responses as direct quotes. Using other sources to verify or refute ChatGPT's response, Drew completes the research paper with ChatGPT cited as a source and turns it in. So our summary of this one, ChatGPT answered some questions for the student. The student did independent research to verify the answers, and ChatGPT was directly quoted and cited. Now our last one, case 4, Parker is researching the history of political upheaval in African countries. The grading rubric does not require a specific number or type of sources. Parker asks ChatGPT some questions as a starting point to figure out what needs to be included in the research. In the process, Parker decides that ChatGPT seems to have it all together. In the final research paper, Parker rephrases the answers ChatGPT provided, doesn't cite ChatGPT, and instead cites some books that were relevant but that weren't actually used in the research that she did, and turns it in. So in summary, ChatGPT was used to gain some context, then determined to simply be paraphrased, and ChatGPT was not cited. So, which of these was an inappropriate use of ChatGPT for research? Well, both Chris and Parker committed plagiarism and exhibited a lack of academic integrity. They both passed off as their own writing that was completed by ChatGPT. That leaves Rory and Drew, who both demonstrated academic integrity, even though they used ChatGPT. Rory used ChatGPT as a search engine or virtual librarian to help find the sources needed for the research paper. Drew validated ChatGPT and used direct quotes of what ChatGPT generated in addition to citing it in the resource list. Notice that it is not the citing of ChatGPT that makes the difference between plagiarism or not, or between academic integrity or not. It's about the way ChatGPT was used and the integrity of the research that was conducted. You may be wondering, how does this actually work? Well, let's look at a conversation that I had with ChatGPT recently. You'll be able to see the interaction between ChatGPT and me, and likely be able to identify some of those limitations and pitfalls. So we're going to watch a quick little screen recording here. I'm asking ChatGPT to help find sources for an essay on the depletion of the habitat for frogs. What ChatGPT has returned is some suggestions for different places to look for those resources. Here I've narrowed down what I'm looking for. Find me books about frog habitats. This is actually finding specific books that I could go get out of the library rather than just giving me categories to look at. Anytime I need more sources, I can ask for more, and ChatGPT will provide more of them. So a couple of things to note here. First, it provided great general tips, super good information about where we can look for information we desire. Second, when I asked specifically about books, it provided a summary even of each of those books. This is what you could expect to find in this book. That can be particularly helpful with narrowing the list down to which sources do I actually want to go look for. And third, we were easily able to regenerate that list to see if additional books might be included the next time that it is created, which they were. While some of the sources overlapped, many of them were new, and that can help you expand. If you've exhausted all of the resources you've got, let's go find some more of them. This can be a great way to refresh your options. Oh, I just said that. And with any of these, a librarian is an excellent source for finding the sources that you want, even if it's general stuff. Think of a librarian as someone who is a professional researcher on the behalf of others. Let's jump back to Amy for a look at why plagiarism happens and the answers to those first two case studies we looked at.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks so much, Sarah. So now we really know what plagiarism is and we get how it happens, but let's talk about why students do it. First, it's because they might be in a hurry, feeling pressure feeling rushed can cause us to make bad decisions. And it also can cause us to be careless. This is all the more reason not to procrastinate and to give yourself plenty of time to complete an assignment. We might also plagiarize because we doubt our own abilities. Lack of confidence may make us feel like a small copy paste here and there is the only way we're going to get through this and get a passing grade. We might also feel unclear about what the instructor really wants from us. The assignment might be really complicated. What can we do? We just need to take a look at a classmate's assignment. It's going to help us get started. We cut and paste and we tell ourselves that we're going to cite it later, but we forget to reword or we forget to cite. Cutting and pasting is very dangerous, so be very careful of that. And lastly, we work in a disorganized fashion. We've got notes everywhere. We've cut and pasted things in notes on our phone. We've got a Word document on our laptop, and we took some hand notes over here in a notebook. And we are multitasking, and we're texting, and we're watching a video, and we're cooking dinner, and we are researching. And when we put it all together, we're making a mistake. We're not citing it properly. We're not paraphrasing it properly. That can easily happen when you're disorganized this way. So let's talk about how not to be disorganized. How can you take the proper steps in your research process? Well, the first step is to search for your materials. We've talked about this. This can mean you use your library, you ask your librarian for journals related to your topic, you look through Google Scholar, those kinds of things, and you gather all your sources. That's your first step. Then you want to organize them in some way so that you can actually keep track of them. You can print them off. Some people still print. You can save them into a folder on your desktop. You can start your reference page. And we have another webinar that goes into more in-depth on this. It's called Critical Thinking and Research Skills. We already mentioned it. You can find that on our YouTube page. And we really do talk a lot more about that research phase and all of that. But I always started with my reference page. I just made the reference page first so that I didn't forget what I was using. Step 2 is to take good notes. When you read these sources, document what you want to use and always keep track of where that information came from. Another one we did was study skills, and we did a note-taking webinar with the study skills webinar. You can check that out on our YouTube page as well if you're not a great note taker. Step 3 is outlining and writing, and here's where I'll tell you a tip to avoid that mosaic plagiarism that I showed you. If you read a really good article, take notes in your own words. Don't copy paste, don't highlight, actually take notes, and then walk away. Go for a walk or just come back to it the next day and write from your memory. Then look back at your notes and figure out where you might be able to insert some research that you found. And as you insert that research, make sure you cite it. Now, here's how you can be sure that you've come up with your own ideas and you've used research from your notes to back up what you've written. It's because you've used your ideas from your memory. That's a really good way to do that. Like I just said, you want to give credit. And then step 5 is to revise. Go back through and make sure your writing flows. So if you read out loud your paper, which is always a good thing to do, when you get to a part that doesn't sound like you and you kind of trip over yourself and it sounds awkward, stop and go, wait a second, did I write that or did that come from a source? And that's very possible that it did. You might be thinking, this sounds like an awful lot of work. I don't have time to do all these things. But I'm going to tell you now, it is a process that can become like second nature if you practice. It's really not as hard as it seems. So a few more tips for avoiding plagiarism. First, talk to your instructor. Ask if it's okay if you reuse some of the writing that you've done for a previous class. Ask for clarification on the assignment. Asking questions is a big part of avoiding plagiarism. Get help from a tutor. Ask a tutor to help you understand assignment directions. You don't even have to get help from a tutor on the actual paper. Maybe you just need someone to help you clarify those directions. Ask for help in any of the research and writing process. It doesn't just have to be the actual writing of the paper. It can be any of the steps. And then write your references first. When you gather all of your sources, write your reference page right away, like I said before. A lot of students think, isn't everything I think coming from somewhere? How do I ever write anything that's original? Well, here's how you know you can trust yourself. Write your thesis and your topic sentences from memory, not from staring down at an article that you just read. Research is used as evidence, It's to back up your thoughts. It isn't the only thought. Synthesize information from several sources. This means you're combining a lot of what you've read to come up with your own thoughts about a topic. And keep in mind that all research papers come from research. You're not being asked to come up with something out of thin air, unless you're writing like a story or a poem. Research papers come from research. So a lot of the stuff in that research paper is not going to be your own. And that's okay if you're citing it. So let's go back to Ravi. Now that you've heard our presentation, is Ravi plagiarizing if he uses the same paper for two different assignments in 2 different classes and in 2 different semesters? The answer is yes. It is self-plagiarism. How can Ravi avoid it? Well, he can ask his instructor first if it's okay. Some instructors might say, yeah, it's fine, I don't mind. If not, though, at least he's going to make the right choice. How about Melanie? This one's a little more complicated. If she just cites the internet when she takes ideas from a discussion board or from other people who have done research, is she plagiarizing? First off, this is an example of sloppy work that can result in serious consequences. It's important to correctly cite all sources of information. Internet is not a correct citation. It's also dangerous to include information in a research paper that you found on the internet, but you can't verify it. The material from the discussion board might be acceptable because doctors did write it, they're experts, but there must be a proper citation. It's best to ask your instructor or a librarian how and if you could cite this. More than likely, the same information that you found on that discussion board can actually be found in an article and can be cited properly. So Melanie should just use that discussion board as a jumping off point. It's not the end all. Let's talk about that website that she used, that a mother compiled a bunch of information to help parents of addicts. All in all, it's best to find out where that initial research came from. At the very least, Melanie may be able to quote the mother directly and cite her as a primary source. I, however, would avoid using her material because no matter how good it is, if she obtained it from different resources, chances are Melanie could also search out those original resources and then cite them properly. Again, just a jumping off point, shouldn't have been her whole paper. So that brings me to paraphrasing versus quoting. This is an area that a lot of students struggle with. So I'm going to go over this. Even though I've done this in other webinars, I'm going to do it again because it's so important. You should paraphrase most of the time because it flows better. It's in your own voice. And when you write in your own voice all the time, it just flows. It also shows critical thinking because you've put the thoughts into your own words in just the right places in your paper. Quoting throughout your paper can come across as choppy, and it also sends a message that you took the easy way out. Because it's so easy to drop quotes all throughout your paper, much easier than it is to take those quotes and paraphrase them. Paraphrase if the information you're presenting is unlikely to be questioned, which should be most of what you're presenting. On the other hand, you should quote if you just really cannot say it any better than how that author originally stated it. If their words are super profound or witty, and you believe that it will just have a bigger impact if you quote it word for word, then you should do that. So, like this quote by Maya Angelou, "This is profound and perfect. There's no way to reword this." This is when a quote is absolutely necessary. Also, if you're taking a very unique position, and that relies on the reader understanding exactly what other writers have said about this topic, then you might want to quote. That's more appropriate. Just be sure that when you're quoting, you use proper transitions and phrases that lead up to and out of your quote to make it flow into the rest of your paper and also to provide the appropriate amount of context. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Using proper transition words when you quote. Here are a few good examples. When you use one of these words, you're giving context to your reader and you're providing a flow from your voice to the voice of the person that you're going to quote. So here's an example. To illustrate the fact that heart disease is a serious killer, the CDC says One person dies every 33 seconds in the United States from cardiovascular disease. So I used a transition word and I led up into that quote. Remember that you always want to use the proper citation format. There are two pieces to every citation. There's that parenthetical documentation, which is the parentheses. You just saw that in the example that I used from the CDC. I was using APA format, by the way, so that may not be the one you're supposed to use. And then the matching reference that goes on the reference page, which would look something like this, which again is APA style. So you cite it in the paper and then you provide the reference on the reference page, and they always have to have both. So before we go, I just want to talk about why plagiarism should matter to you. First of all, most schools have zero tolerance plagiarism policies. And while they may suspect that you maybe didn't do it on purpose, it's really hard to prove it was an accident. So this means if you're caught plagiarizing, you will likely fail the assignment. You might fail the whole course. Many schools' plagiarism policies include consequences of academic probation, suspension, or even expulsion for students who plagiarize. A record of plagiarism may lead to difficulty in gaining admission to other colleges and universities in the future. Even if you're not caught, there's still an academic cost to plagiarism. Teachers, instructors give writing assignments to allow in-depth learning and allow you to demonstrate that you have some knowledge. When you copy someone else's work, you miss out on this experience. This missed learning could lead to difficulty in higher level courses. Although most cases of academic plagiarism are handled by the school disciplinary board, plagiarism in your professional life, like works published on a company website or in newspapers or in professional journals, or maybe in your personal life, if you write a blog, for example, can actually have legal consequences. Plagiarism is a misdemeanor and it's punishable with fines up to $50,000, even jail time. But more realistically, if you don't learn the material that you should, you can have a hard time getting a job. Many companies will ask interview questions that can easily and quickly illuminate your lack of knowledge. Finding a position in a new industry is hard enough. You want to set yourself up for success. So you want to know as much as you can before that interview. And that's why you go to school. You may also find that it's difficult to keep a job when you're expected to jump right in and know your stuff. Your education is preparing you for this, so you don't want to take any shortcuts. And with all that said, here are our references from this presentation. And now we would love to take your questions. I'll pass it back over to Maxine.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. Tons of really great information in there. And I know that a lot of people have already mentioning that they really found this helpful. Before we do get to the questions, which again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop those into the question box. I did want to highlight to follow us on our socials. So follow us on Instagram, Facebook. That way you'll see all of our upcoming webinars or events that we have coming in the future. We also have our YouTube channel linked right here. And again, you can easily access all of our previous webinars and content through there. And something that isn't listed here, but will be included in the follow-up email is we have a brand new webinar hub. So if you go to tutor.com/webinars, you'll get to our brand new webinar hub. It again easily links out to all of our previous webinars, and we'll also have links to our upcoming webinars moving forward. So with that, all that said, a couple questions did come in. One, is there going to be a recording for folks to access in the future? Yes, in the next day or so, you'll get a follow-up email with that recording. Another question from somebody was, any tips on how to check if something is plagiarized?
Ooh, so that's a good question. So I guess, Sarah, Maxine, do you think this is coming from someone who's like an instructor or a teacher?
That's a great question. If they
Good
want
one.
to clarify, that would be really helpful. But I'm wondering, maybe
Hmm.
are there any tools, or how do you check if something's plagiarized from the point of view of a student who maybe wants to make sure that they aren't accidentally plagiarizing, they aren't missing a quotation or a citation?
Mm.
Maybe from that point of view.
Okay, that's a great question. Sarah, do you have any thoughts, or do you want me to answer that one?
I think this is your field.
Okay, great question. I mean, Google is really going to be the best way to do it. If you
Mhm.
put something in Google that you're checking to see if it's out there, it's probably going to pop back and tell you whether or not it's somewhere. That's probably the best, easiest way. But um, one of the things that you want to do when you're writing a paper, or if this is coming from a student perspective, one of the things you want to do when you're writing a paper is you don't want to use anything that's questionable. If you're not looking at the exact journal yourself, or you're not looking at the book that you're citing, then you are taking a risk there that you're, using, you don't want to cite someone else's citation of something, which is something that happens. We don't want to cite someone else. You want to cite the actual source. So more than likely, if you're questioning that, you're like, I don't know if this is plagiarized or not, like I got it from Wikipedia or something like that, then I would say try to find that first source and cite it from there. You're much more likely to be safe doing that. And if you're not sure, again, drop some of the stuff in Google. I don't know. We haven't tried it in AI, Sarah. There's a possibility you could drop something in Chat GPT and ask if this is plagiarized. And I
Yeah,
wonder
I
what Chat
haven't tried
GPT
that.
would do.
Yeah,
It's worth trying.
yeah.
Awesome. And then I will just say that that person did clarify that they're a public librarian and they work with
Mm.
teens who write book reviews for volunteer credit. So I guess now from the flip side,
Ooh.
from like an administrator's point of view or a teacher's point of view, how can you check for that?
Mm. That's a good one. That kind of stumps me. The only way that that I really was checking for plagiarism was when I was using plagiarism detection software like Turnitin or something like that, was the best way that I was able to do that when I was grading papers and things like that. I'm not really sure how you just do it yourself. Again, um,
Google. If
Google
you
and
don't have plagiarism detection software, I think Google is going to be your best starting point.
mm-hmm. Or Chat GPT. Try that too, and ask, "Is this plagiarized? Where did this come from?" I don't know. See what it does.
Yeah, somebody else just mentioned that they're also a librarian or an adjunct professor and that they just Google selections for plagiarism.
Yep.
So that that might help out as well.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked a question. This is kind of just recapping what we went over earlier. Perhaps they joined late. But is self-plagiarism a serious problem and how do you avoid that?
That's a great question. It is a serious problem. I actually have a very, very good friend who was almost expelled from college for doing this many years ago, before we were really, really using a lot of technology that I don't know how the instructor figured it out, but did. And so it is a serious problem. And the best way to avoid it is just to ask if it's okay if you use um, a paper that you wrote for another class. If they say no, ask, is it okay if I use the same sources that I used for the other? Really ask questions and make sure, see what the professor expects of you. More than likely, the professor wants you to do something totally different. And that's great as long as you know it. But if you try to, let me just see if I can get this through, you're probably going to get caught nowadays, because Turnitin is going to find it. And most instructors are using some kind of plagiarism detection software, or like the people on this call, they're going to throw it into Google and who knows what's going to come up. Probably not your paper, but I don't know. You never know. I just wouldn't do it unless you ask if it's okay. But I've seen it a ton of times from my students who've tried it and it popped up on Turnitin, and I could see immediately that they already wrote this paper. So it is a problem.
All right, awesome. We're getting a couple of questions about proof of attendance for this webinar. If you've attended, you will be getting a follow-up email, so you should be able to use that as kind of proof of attendance. But I can check with on our end to see if there's anything else, perhaps a certificate that we can work on to include in that follow-up. But at the very least, that follow-up email should be usable as a proof of attendance. Just a lot of people saying like kind of their own experiences with using ChatGPT or using Turnitin. So I think
Mm,
that's really fantastic to
great.
see, and some tools for us to potentially look into for further kind of sessions of this. I know that somebody mentioned Papers Owl is an AI-based free plagiarism checker. So potentially in the next time that we do this, we can look into some of these tools to
Great.
see how helpful they might be in the future and whether or not they might be something helpful for folks. I'm also seeing a number of people ask if they can link out to the YouTube channel or that tutor.com/webinars page I mentioned earlier to kind of help support at-risk students. And yes, you are more than welcome to do all of that. A lot of these resources we're creating for you to kind of share with your students and kind of the patrons that you're working with so that they can kind of improve their own studies on their end. So yeah, let's see.
One thing that
Yeah.
I've seen here in the questions is about
Mhm,
checking students' work against AI. So not
mhm.
so much are they plagiarizing resources out there, but are they plagiarizing ChatGPT?
Hmm.
And I think it's going to be very difficult to know that for sure. But I think honestly, the best way to be able to measure that is reading through it. It is things written by ChatGPT have a certain feel to
Hmm.
them. If you have spent much time in there, and if you haven't, go in there and ask it questions. Get a feel for its language style, and you're going to be able to recognize that at least from a I suspect that this might have come somewhere from ChatGPT sort of perspective to be able to look further, but also knowing the writing style of your students and whether this is reasonable for that student. Because I think
Hmm.
there are some students who just do not have advanced writing skills, and it's going to be very clear that what came from ChatGPT is way beyond their ability. It's
Yep.
hard if you don't know for sure that anything they've submitted to you is written by them, but otherwise it's very difficult to know if it came from ChatGPT if they don't tell you that it did, and if you aren't familiar with the way ChatGPT sort of puts together its words.
I agree with that. I've heard from different, I've attended a few different webinars on AI and instructors and teachers and things. And the main thing I've heard is, yeah, people can see it's glaringly different than anything the student has written before, or there's just this very odd, sounding paragraph that doesn't flow quite right. And they have to ask the student, where did this come from? It doesn't sound like you. And also, depending on if you're, a virtual teacher, or if you're an instructor that's, has students in front of you and you can actually in person have them write. That's another way that you can get sort of a sampling of what your students' writing capabilities are, is to make them write something in front of you. And then you have that to kind of base the rest of their writing off of. I've heard that as well, but that's hard to do when you're a virtual teacher.
One other
On
thing that just came to mind was that you can take your writing prompt, whatever it is that you gave the student, you can go put it into ChatGPT. And even if two people put the same prompt in and they get two different things back, there are still going to be a lot of similarities in the
Mm-hmm.
structure that ChatGPT takes. And I have an example of that. We did a webinar on resume writing and cover letter writing recently, and we used ChatGPT. We were like, let's see what happens if we ask ChatGPT to write us a resume or to write us a cover letter. And then, unrelated to that, we had an open position on our team, and Amy and I were reviewing resumes and cover letters. And there was a cover letter that came through that was so different from any other cover letter we've seen, and yet so similar to what we got out of ChatGPT, that we're fairly certain that it was a ChatGPT written cover letter. Because we were familiar with the way that ChatGPT puts stuff out there, and
Yep.
because it stood out from the others as being written in a different sort of way.
Yep.
Even though it was clearly English, it was proper grammar, all the things, but there was just something about it.
It's
Um,
true.
I do have a question, just kind of regarding ChatGPT. How do you go about citing that if you might get two different responses for a single prompt? Because I know that you mentioned in one of the examples earlier about some of the students citing ChatGPT in their papers. How would you best go about that?
So the example that I used with the frogs and the turtles was specifically the prompt was determining whether or not ChatGPT's responses were accurate. So of course you're going to respond, or you're going to reference ChatGPT because ChatGPT has an active role in this paper. And then you're going to reference other sources. You can directly quote ChatGPT, this is what it said, and it's possible no one will ever be able to reproduce that direct quote. That doesn't mean that it wasn't a direct quote. It's just kind of the nature of ChatGPT. But if, generally speaking, if you are using ChatGPT the way that you really should be using it in academic writing, I don't believe that there should be a need to cite it, because you should be using it as a virtual librarian. I'm not going to cite my librarian in my research paper, so I wouldn't cite my virtual librarian either. They're just helping me find sources. They're not actually giving me information. If I'm asking it to clarify something, I'm going to go somewhere else to verify that, right? We talked about all those different things that it's going to do for you that need to be vetted. If I'm going to this other source to vet what ChatGPT said, that other source is more of a primary source than ChatGPT is. So that is where I should be pulling my citation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that does. I don't see any other questions that came in, and I know we're kind of coming up on time, so I did just want to thank everybody for submitting their questions and kind of their comments about AI, academic integrity. We've had so many great questions and comments come in today. And thank you, Sarah and Amy, for this presentation. There was tons of great information, and all of this is going to be available on our YouTube channel and in that follow-up email. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining me today, and thanks Sarah and Amy for presenting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody.